do this for my family. This is not a surprise to anybody. It's really sad that it's got to this point, but I've got to do something for my own mental health, for my wife's.
Over 90% of royal coverage in the United Kingdom is driven by just 5 newspapers. In 2024, the New York Times joined the chorus, questioning Prince William's leadership. But the real headline came after, when Harry and Meghan broke their silence to reject the article's tone. Why did they defend the brother they've long been estranged from? What did this moment say about shifting loyalties, media lines, and the future of royal image control? The image of Prince William has long been shaped by quiet composure, royal duty, and a life measured by protocol. But between 2015 and 2017, that image came under quiet but persistent strain. A phrase began circulating in headlines and tabloids, "workshy William," suggesting that the future king was not doing enough to justify his position. It started subtly, tucked inside opinion pieces and weekly columns, but it grew louder with time. As his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and his father, Prince Charles, carried out hundreds of engagements each year, critics began asking why Prince William's royal calendar looked relatively light. The term stuck, not because it was entirely fair, but because it played into a broader question. What does modern royal duty really look like? Critics pointed out that William, while still a helicopter pilot for the East Anglian Air Ambulance, wasn't seen as much in traditional royal engagements. Newspapers like The Sun and the Daily Mail amplified these concerns, running stories comparing him to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose dedication to duty was considered unmatched. There were pieces that accused him of hiding behind family life, suggesting that time with his children and wife was coming at the expense of public service. While some readers found that claim unfair, the repetition gave it power. By 2016, the term workshy had become a staple in discussions about William's role. Public opinion began to divide. Some empathized, arguing that William, shaped by the trauma of losing his mother, Princess Diana, was striving to create a different kind of royal life, one rooted in privacy and balance. Others felt his position came with obligations that couldn't be postponed or rearranged. Royal aides, meanwhile, defended his choices, saying that William was committed to both his job with the air ambulance and his family, while gradually preparing for more senior royal responsibilities. But the label had already gained traction, and once a narrative is picked up by the press, it rarely fades quietly. What made the situation more delicate was that Prince Harry, William's younger brother, was often used as a comparison. At the time, Harry was a full-time working royal, engaged in charity work, military causes, and global events like the Invictus Games. Media outlets didn't just report on William's absences, they juxtaposed them with Harry's activity. It set up a subtle rivalry, not of personalities, but of work ethic. And whether the brothers welcomed it or not, the contrast became part of the public conversation. The palace never addressed the workshy label directly. Their communication strategy, especially under Queen Elizabeth II, was based on silence over correction. The belief was that engaging with the press on every piece of criticism would only give it oxygen. But even without an official statement, the tension was visible. William increased his public duties in the years that followed. From 2017 onward, especially after the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge took on more senior roles following Prince Philip's retirement, his calendar began to fill out. The shift was noted, but the previous criticism lingered. This is where context becomes important. The British press has a long history of shaping royal perception. In William's case, the narrative of being lazy or workshy wasn't just about missed engagements. It became symbolic of a broader generational divide within the monarchy. William and Kate represented a more modern image of royalty, less formal, more reserved. But that very informality was sometimes read as disengagement. The Queen's model of duty, forged in the fire of post-war Britain, didn't always align with what William was trying to build. As Meghan Markle entered the royal picture in 2018, the media lens grew sharper. The coverage of Meghan and Harry quickly evolved from excitement to intense scrutiny, and this had an indirect effect on how William was seen too. Suddenly, Every move the brothers made was interpreted through a competitive lens. Who was working more? Who was more dutiful? Who represented the future of the monarchy better? It wasn't just about internal decisions anymore. It was about how those decisions were being perceived and published. The notion of being workshy stopped being about William alone. It became part of a larger media framework that judged royal value based on public visibility. If a royal wasn't photographed, were they working? If they chose to focus on fewer, more meaningful causes, were they dodging responsibility? These were the types of questions that filled the comment sections and op-eds. William, known for his preference for privacy, didn't respond. But the narrative hung in the air, especially as Harry and Meghan's popularity surged globally. By the time the Sussexes stepped down from royal duties in 2020, the public conversation had changed again. Their departure sparked new debates about who was truly committed to service. Ironically, the brothers had swapped places in the media's eyes. Harry and Meghan were now being criticized for abandoning duty, while William was slowly being praised for stepping up. The workshy label hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer dominated headlines. Still, it had left a mark. What is most striking, looking back, is how such labels form and persist in public consciousness. William's work ethic, like that of many public figures, was interpreted through snapshots and attendance lists. His dedication to mental health advocacy, homelessness, and early childhood development wasn't always as visible as ribbon cuttings or handshakes, but it was there. Yet visibility, especially in the age of social media, often outweighs substance. And for a royal, perception can become reality. These earlier tensions around the workshy label would later return with greater force in 2024, when a prominent article from the New York Times reignited public discourse about William's leadership style. But even before that article was published, the groundwork had been laid. The British media had already shaped a long-standing narrative about duty, presence, and public accountability. And for a monarchy that survives on tradition and perception, those narratives are difficult to undo. By the early 2020s, the royal brothers were on very different paths. William, preparing for future kingship, had become increasingly visible in national and international engagements. Harry and Meghan, now based in the United States, were redefining what royal influence could look like outside the institution. Their global reach through interviews, documentaries, and philanthropic work gave them an entirely different platform. But even across an ocean, the old media narratives followed them all. And the next chapter in this evolving story would pull them all back into the spotlight this time because of a newspaper article that triggered a very rare public response from the Sussexes. By the time Prince Harry and Meghan Markle announced their decision to step back from royal duties in January 2020, the media landscape surrounding the monarchy had already shifted dramatically. Years of relentless tabloid coverage, escalating comparisons, and internal family tension had turned public interest into a feeding frenzy. The British press, which had once celebrated Meghan's entry into the royal family with glowing headlines, had grown increasingly aggressive. From her fashion choices to her family background, Meghan became a target for criticism in a way that felt both personal and calculated. The contrast between her treatment and the reception Kate Middleton received in her early royal years did not go unnoticed, especially by those outside the United Kingdom. Within this atmosphere, the decision to step back, later dubbed Megxit by the press, wasn't entirely surprising. What was surprising, though, was the speed at which it happened. In their official statement, released on 8 January 2020, Harry and Meghan expressed a desire to carve out a progressive new role within the royal institution, one that allowed them to be financially independent while still supporting the Queen. But the institution wasn't built for such half measures. The result was a complete severing of official royal duties and the start of a new life in North America. Media coverage of this decision was intense. In the United Kingdom, opinion was split. Some supported the couple's right to protect their mental health and raise their family outside the harsh glare of the royal spotlight. Others saw it as an abdication of responsibility, a betrayal of royal duty. The tabloids, in particular, painted a narrative of abandonment and selfishness. Once again, the language of public service was used as a measuring stick, and comparisons quickly emerged between Meghan and Kate, between Harry and William, and between past royals who had weathered criticism and those who, in the public eye, had walked away. For William, this marked a turning point. The focus that had once been on his so-called workshy habits was now redirected toward his brother. As Harry and Meghan relocated to Canada and then the United States, their visibility didn't decrease, it multiplied. Interviews with Oprah Winfrey, partnerships with streaming platforms, and the launch of Archewell Foundation signaled that the couple was not retreating from public life, just reframing it on their own terms. But their increasing media presence only intensified scrutiny. Every word, every appearance, every statement was examined for signs of royal critique or private grievance. The relationship between the brothers also became a frequent topic in the press. Long before Harry confirmed in interviews that there was distance between them, speculation was rampant. The notion of a family rift wasn't new, but the specifics around the departure, who was informed, who approved what, and how decisions were communicated, fueled endless media cycles. Behind these headlines was a deeper narrative, that Harry and Meghan's choice challenged more than tradition, it challenged the institution's control over its own image. This was especially evident in the way the press handled their statements. When Harry spoke about the impact of tabloid coverage on their mental health, it was often framed as whining. When Meghan revealed her struggles with loneliness and even suicidal thoughts during her time as a working royal, reactions were mixed. Supporters praised her honesty. Critics called it theatrical. But in every case, the core of the discussion was visibility. The same press that once demanded more appearances and public service from working royals now accused them of overexposure when speaking outside palace walls. This double standard wasn't lost on observers. Analysts noted that the royal family traditionally operated within a tightly controlled media ecosystem, relying on friendly publications and trusted correspondence to shape narratives. Harry and Meghan bypassed that entirely. Their interviews, speeches, and projects spoke directly to the public, often without palace clearance or media intermediaries. It was unprecedented, and it was polarizing. Meanwhile, Prince William quietly began stepping into a more prominent leadership role. By 2021, he had taken on more high-profile appearances, particularly on issues tied to climate change, mental health, and early childhood development. His public image stabilized, and the workshy narrative that had haunted him years earlier faded further into the background. Royal correspondents shifted their tone, describing William as a steady future king, especially in contrast to the volatility associated with his brother's departure. But this evolving perception didn't erase the tension. As Harry and Meghan continued building their platform from California, their statements and media ventures often reignited debate back in the United Kingdom. One particularly sharp divide emerged around their interview with Oprah Winfrey in March 2021. Among the many revelations was Harry's claim that William was trapped within the system, an observation that drew swift backlash from royal supporters and some members of the press. William, for his part, offered only a brief public rebuttal, stating, "We are very much not a racist family," in response to the allegations made during the interview. That short statement was one of the few direct responses from William to his brother's public narrative. But silence has always been a strategic tool for the monarchy. Where Meghan and Harry chose transparency and media engagement, William maintained the traditional royal approach, measured, minimal, and indirect. Yet in the digital age, where audiences expect access, authenticity, and open dialogue, silence can also be misinterpreted. By 2023, the divide between the two brothers was no longer just personal. It had become philosophical. Harry and Meghan's model was rooted in global activism, digital reach, and personal storytelling. William's was based on continuity, stability, and a measured approach to public engagement. These weren't just different strategies, they represented different visions of monarchy itself. Amid this backdrop, The New York Times article in 2024 landed like a thunderclap. In a lengthy opinion piece, the publication scrutinized Prince William's leadership style and revisited long-standing criticisms of his work ethic. It didn't rely on anonymous palace sources or royal watchers. It cited patterns, statistics, and global comparisons. The headline didn't use the word workshy, but the subtext was unmistakable. The piece questioned whether William's image as a reliable heir matched the demands of a modern constitutional monarchy. For many, it felt like history repeating itself. The same criticisms that had trailed William a decade earlier were back, repackaged in a more global and critical tone. But this time, the reaction was different, not just from the public, but from Prince Harry and Meghan themselves. Their response would mark a rare moment of direct engagement with a narrative that, while not about them, deeply intersected with their own journey. When the New York Times published its critical opinion piece in mid-2024, it triggered a fresh wave of commentary across both British and international media. The article didn't rely on anonymous palace whispers or tabloid speculation. It pointed to measurable facts, public engagement numbers, charity involvement, leadership visibility, and questioned whether Prince William's role as heir to the throne was evolving fast enough to meet the expectations of a modern public. Without directly calling him workshy, the article examined his relative absence from major international conversations, especially when compared to figures like Prince Harry and even Queen Rania of Jordan or Crown Princess Victoria of Sweden. The article gained traction quickly. Within hours of publication, social media amplified its arguments, and traditional media outlets picked it up with their own spins. In the United Kingdom, coverage ranged from defensive rebuttals to more introspective analysis. Some royal experts defended William, pointing to his steady commitment to causes like mental health, conservation, and early childhood development. Others conceded that the article had touched on a growing undercurrent of concern about the monarchy's future leadership and its relevance beyond British borders. What made this moment particularly unusual, however, was the response it drew, not from the palace, but from Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Historically, members of the royal family do not comment on each other's media coverage, especially not in defense. But this was different. Within a few days, statements attributed to sources close to the Duke and Duchess of Sussex appeared in several respected media outlets. The tone was calm but pointed. They distanced themselves from the article's criticisms, making it clear that despite their strained relationship with the royal institution, they did not support attempts to undermine Prince William's public role. This response surprised many. For years, the narrative had cast the brothers as rivals, driven apart by duty, personal choices, and media pressures. Some expected Harry and Meghan to remain silent, if not implicitly supportive of the article's broader critique. Instead, their response suggested something more complex, a willingness to protect the monarchy's credibility even while operating outside it. According to one report, Meghan in particular was dismayed by the tone of the article, feeling that it fed into the same cycle of public shaming and division that had harmed her own experience within the royal family. For Harry, the situation struck a delicate balance. He had spent the last several years speaking openly about the limitations and dysfunctions of royal life. Yet he also knew the power of headlines and how damaging labels like workshy could be, not just to individuals, but to the broader institution. In private, he had reportedly expressed regret over how easily reputations could be distorted by selective reporting. His own had been shaped and reshaped through that lens more than once. His decision to offer quiet but clear support for William in this moment reflected a personal understanding of how narratives can spiral beyond control. This moment marked one of the rare instances where the Sussexes defended not themselves, but the very structure they had left behind. Their response didn't absolve years of tension or undo the deeply personal differences that had built up over time. But it sent a message that some lines should not be crossed, not by the media, and not in public discourse. It also highlighted a recurring pattern. While the royal family itself often remained silent in the face of criticism, Harry and Meghan had become skilled at managing media moments. They knew how to pivot, how to reframe, and how to disrupt assumptions, all without needing a formal press conference or staged appearance. Following their response, the reaction was mixed. Some commentators praised them for taking the high road and defending their family. Others questioned their motives, suggesting that it was a strategic move to rebuild goodwill with the British public or palace insiders. But those closer to the situation viewed it differently. For them, this was about drawing a line, refusing to endorse narratives that had once hurt them, even when directed at others. What the Sussexes understood, perhaps better than anyone else in the royal ecosystem, was how quickly a headline could become a legacy. Meghan had learned it during her first year as a duchess. Harry had lived there since the days following his mother's death. The way stories are told, who is framed as loyal, who is painted as reckless, who is elevated and who is torn down, carries real consequences. So when the New York Times article positioned Prince William as outdated and uninspiring, it wasn't just a critique of one man. It was a commentary on an entire institution. And even outside that institution, Harry and Meghan were still tethered to its fate. In the weeks that followed, the palace maintained its usual silence. No official comment was made, and Prince William did not address the article publicly. Instead, his schedule appeared unchanged. He visited community centers, gave speeches on climate change, and attended engagements across the United Kingdom. There was no visible shift in tone or urgency, but observers noted that behind the scenes, there was unease. While the article had not caused a formal crisis, it raised questions about how the monarchy intended to manage international scrutiny in an age when digital media moves faster than protocol. Meanwhile, the Sussexes continued their own projects, largely unaffected by the debate in the United Kingdom. But the moment had created something rare, a brief alignment between two royal factions often perceived as at odds. And it underscored a deeper truth, that even with oceans, titles, and duties separating them, their stories remained linked in the public mind. What emerged from this exchange was not a reconciliation, but a reassertion of boundaries. Harry and Meghan had made it clear they were not interested in attacking William or playing into narratives that could fracture the monarchy further. Their public lives were now independent, but their legacy, especially Harry's, was still shaped by the institution he was born into. For William, the article may have stung, but it also served as a reminder that silence has limits. In an age where public trust depends on engagement, where criticism travels at the speed of a tweet, the monarchy's traditional approach to media may no longer be sufficient. While the Queen's era was defined by restraint, the current generation faces a different challenge. Navigating a world where duty is no longer just fulfilled, it must be seen, explained, and often defended. As the dust settled from the New York Times controversy, one thing became clear. The royal family, fractured though it may be, is still held to shared expectations. Whether inside the palace or thousands of miles away, the consequences of public narratives are felt by all. And as the years unfold, how each royal responds, not just to tradition, but to each other, will continue to shape the future of the monarchy itself. In the months following the New York Times article and the Sussexes' carefully measured response, a quiet recalibration began to take place behind the scenes. While the royal family did not engage directly with the press or the public commentary, the institution's communication strategy became noticeably more deliberate. Royal engagements were planned with increased visibility in mind, particularly for Prince William. His appearances became more frequent and at times more strategically timed around key political, environmental, and cultural milestones. The goal was subtle but clear: to project an image of consistency, authority, and modern relevance. For Prince William, the criticism may have been unwelcome, but it also underscored a challenge he could not ignore. As the heir to the throne in a 21st century media environment, public silence was no longer interpreted as strength by all audiences. Where Queen Elizabeth II once upheld duty by saying little and being seen sparingly, the world William would eventually lead demanded more engagement, more narrative control, and more personal resonance. His team understood this. Reports suggested that advisors had been encouraging a more media-savvy approach for some time, balancing royal restraint with selective openness. Meanwhile, Harry and Meghan continued to navigate their life in the United States with a careful combination of activism, content production, and public appearances. They had distanced themselves physically and structurally from the monarchy, but not from the public conversations that continued to swirl around it. Interviews, awards appearances, and streaming projects allowed them to shape their own narrative, yet the connection to the royal institution remained a defining element of how they were seen. Even when not speaking about the monarchy directly, their every statement was dissected through that lens. What emerged in the aftermath of the New York Times controversy was a subtle but meaningful shift in how all parties responded to media provocation. The palace continued its tradition of not responding to opinion pieces or speculative articles, but behind the scenes, sources noted a growing awareness of the limits of that strategy. The Sussexes, on the other hand, chose their battles more selectively. Their defense of Prince William was not a sign of reconciliation, but a boundary-setting move, a signal that not all criticism of the institution should be treated as fair game, even from voices outside the traditional royal press corps. This boundary was particularly significant because it showed that Meghan and Harry were unwilling to replicate the very cycle of narrative control that had once hurt them. It would have been easy, and even satisfying, for them to stay quiet or allow others to interpret their silence as endorsement. Instead, they stepped in, knowing that the same mechanisms that had framed them unfairly were now being directed at someone else in the family. Their refusal to support that treatment, even passively, marked a level of restraint that many observers had not expected. Prince William's public persona also appeared to evolve during this period. While he remained private and avoided media commentary, his engagements began to reflect a slightly more open tone. In speeches and initiatives, he leaned more into his own voice, less scripted, more direct. He continued championing mental health, climate policy, and early childhood development, but with an added emphasis on long-term vision. Royal watchers noted that his posture during public engagements seemed more confident, more willing to show emotion, and less concerned with adhering to the model of the past. The timing of these adjustments was no coincidence. As media pressure intensified and public opinion grew more fragmented, both William and Harry recognized that legacy was not something to be inherited. It was something to be actively built. Whether within the monarchy or outside of it, both men were engaged in the difficult work of shaping how they would be remembered in an era where scrutiny never sleeps. They may have chosen different paths, but they remained bound by a shared understanding of what it meant to be born into public life. By early 2025, the broader public discussion around the monarchy had become increasingly complex. Support for the royal family remained strong in many parts of the United Kingdom, but surveys also showed growing generational divides. Younger audiences, particularly those more active on digital platforms, demanded authenticity, reform, and a clearer moral compass. In this climate, the actions or inactions of senior royals were measured not just in tradition, but in tone, transparency, and relevance. The New York Times article was never formally addressed again, but its impact lingered. It prompted discussions within media outlets about how they covered monarchy, and among royal advisors about how to anticipate and manage similar critiques in the future. It also brought to light how quickly global publications, not just the British tabloids, could influence the public image of a royal figure. For a family so closely tied to national identity, the international lens had become equally powerful and equally unpredictable. For Harry and Meghan, the episode added another layer to their already complex relationship with both the media and the monarchy. They had long argued that the institution did not adequately protect them from unfair narratives. In this case, they had shown what that protection could look like, even if informally. It reminded observers that while the Sussexes had stepped away from their royal roles, they had not abandoned their values. That included, it seemed, a willingness to defend fairness, even for those from whom they had grown distant. As for William, his next steps were being watched more closely than ever. The article had raised questions not about his character, but about the pace and visibility of his leadership. His challenge moving forward would not be to defend himself with words, but to answer with presence. Each appearance, each speech, and each initiative would now carry additional weight. The expectation was not perfection, but progression, proof that the future king understood the need to evolve alongside the world he would one day serve. The legacy of Queen Elizabeth II had been defined by silence, patience, and ceremonial power. For the next generation, silence alone would not be enough. The monarchy's future depended on how well its members could navigate a world that demanded both tradition and transformation. And in that journey, the choices made after moments of pressure, like the one sparked by the New York Times, would matter just as much as the titles they carried. In the end, this episode did not rewrite the story of the royal family, but it added a meaningful chapter, one where rivalry gave way momentarily to restraint, one where criticism provoked not a defensive wall, but a rare gesture of quiet solidarity, and one where a family known for its distance from the public spotlight was reminded that, in the modern age, every silence, every sentence, and every subtle gesture is part of the narrative, whether they choose to participate in it or not. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.